The Tempest is the only entity that can save this land, the only being strong enough to keep us alive or preserve what's left. In this era of turmoil, one man's face in the Tempest still burns bright. Even through the horrors of war, he has survived. On the day a storm was told to cross the battlefield, this man traveled to the highest mountain. That place was said to have been given to man to allow them to reach the gods in their time of need. On this day, the man chose to weather the storm and meet the god he worshipped. The man began his ascent, with one goal: reach the mountain summit. Once he was at the top, he believed that his prayers would be carried to the Tempest. It was said that upon the mountain, mortals could commune with their god. During his climb, he prayed for strength to reach his goal. After hours of climbing, he reached the summit. He could see across the land. Seeing from this point of view, he realized his fears still haunted him. The enemy still covered the battlefield like a plague. They swarmed every corner. Even from this height, the wind carried the scent of death and the sounds of the demise of men. Their screams fueled his prayers. Why must men die in such a way? Where is the honor in surrounding them and stabbing them in the back? Knowing his men continued to die only drove the man to pray with more fervor. He remembered the stories told of the gods accepting the prayers of men. It was said the gods chose a champion to bring the battle in their favor, bringing glory to a lost cause. So he prayed. He didn't cease his cry even as the scent and sounds of death were all he could sense. Dark clouds grew over the battlefield. When the freezing rain began to cover him and chill his bones, he still prayed. He didn't flinch. He committed to facing the storm and proving his worth. When the lightning struck him, he felt it as an answer to his call. His body shook and he could no longer see the land. His senses failed him and he fell into darkness. He woke in a cyclone, the endless realm of the god of storms. Their will is unknown, but their power was said to be stronger than anything known to mortals. Nature does not yield. The pain from the lightning strike coursed through the man, but though he fell, his will remained unbroken. He still faced the storm. His skin began to char and burn, but his prayer did not end. Before him lay the world. Not just the mountain and the battlefield, not just a field of death, but an entire world dying from constant conflict. He wanted to fall to his knees, but he couldn't. He could only lay there while his body was broken. He knew he must show the storm his resolve. Even if he couldn't move his body, his spirit was still strong. Even if he could gain the help of God, how would he be able to save the dying world? "Rise!" boomed a voice made of thunder. A wave of energy hit the man's body and spirit. He was granted the strength to jump into the air and was held there by an unseen force. Before him there was no man, but a swirling tempest made of the storm. Red lightning shone. His face was a cyclone. His arms were the lightning that created fire, and his voice was the thunder that called repentance upon the earth. The man inhaled the storm. It chilled his body to its core, but then he felt his charred skin no longer burn. Instead of shunning his gaze away from the god of the tempest, he remained stalwart, challenging the immortal storm instead. Another wave of energy entered the man. He felt the pain, but he did not scream. He only accepted the gift being given to him. "You do not shrink before the storm. This was why you were chosen. You will be my champion. Take my weapon and finish this conflict." The immortal storm struck the hero with a final wave of energy. In a flash of light, the man awoke from his vision. In his mind, he heard one final command. "Rise, hero. Show those that oppose me why you are my chosen vessel." In his hands, the hero felt power. He now held the shaft of a great spear, a miraculous creation. He did not understand how, but it was part of the god he served, a weapon of the storm made manifest for this moment. "Be swift. Once the storm passes the battlefield, our contract is done and your strength with it." The spear was 10 feet long. The shaft was seemingly made of lightweight wood, but he knew it was unbreakable. The blade of the great spear was straight, and it looked as if it was lightning incarnate. He smiled. This day he could win. He would stop the enemy from killing anyone else. The screams of his men reached him again upon the wind, so he jumped from the mountain to join them. He flew through the air with speed and grace. He was lightning. He felt the power course through his body. He was no longer a man, he was a force of nature, ready to bring the will of his god to a fallen world even if for a short time. He landed on the battlefield, and a shockwave of energy tossed debris in all directions. Enemies surrounded him. The hero thrust his spear into the earth. Another wave of thunder exploded from where he stood. The thunder was heard all around him. They all turned toward him. Spears, swords, axes, and arrows now pointed in his direction, but they did not strike, seemingly waiting to assess the new threat. The hero ignored them and instead looked toward his ally that lay on the ground. "Are you able to stand?" he spoke. The injured soldier nodded. The hero extended his hand. The soldier, with help, rose and stood. The hero felt the jolt of energy leave his body and enter the soldier. The man's posture changed. He picked up his weapon and looked toward the enemy. The hero smiled. "On this day, the god we worship is with us. Fight like a storm, and the storm will guide you." The hero heard a call for his enemies to strike from the enemy captain. The hero shook his head in pity for them. He raised his spear. He spun the weapon in the air and pointed it toward a line of enemy soldiers. A lightning bolt struck 50 men. Most of the enemy soldiers in this area fell to the ground, burnt by his lightning. A few rose again to continue their attack, but many never stood again. Though the hero displayed power that many men had never experienced, the enemy did not stop their assault. They began to close in on the hero and his ally. The hero closed his eyes and let the storm take over. He felt as if he was made of the wind itself. He extended his hand and a burst of cold energy escaped, covering a third of the enemy. With his other hand, he swung a spear with deadly precision, cutting down 20 men in one swing. The spear knew where to strike. The hero was only there to wield it. The hero waited for the enemy to get closer. When they surrounded him, he gathered energy into his body and created a cone of freezing rain and wind that shot at the enemy. He grabbed the spear with both hands and swung in a wave of lightning. The enemy was struck by the energy, causing their bodies to spasm and fall paralyzed. They did not rise after his attack. Before him was a field of dead. His allies still stood, looking for any remaining enemies. He didn't comprehend how he was able to do these wonderful and terrible things. The hero turned toward his ally. "Spread the word to all that still live. Meet at the mountain and prepare for our final assault." His ally thanked him and ran towards the mountain. The hero gripped the spear and jumped into the air. He had one goal: protect those who were his allies and strike down any that opposed him. As he rose, he closed his eyes and listened. He was able to spread his senses across the land. Through the clouds and thunder, the hero heard the voices and prayers asking for aid. There was a distant scream. It was not a battle cry. It was terror. He felt the fear hit his soul. He rode the winds and landed where a small group of his allies cowered in fear. They defended themselves the best they could, but they were a sorry lot. They looked at him, but they did not seem to recognize their ally. He extended his hand, and a young man, after some hesitation, took it. He rose, and so did the rest of his small squad. "Who are you?" the young man said. The hero turned from his allies and looked at the enemies advancing around him. "What manner of warriors are these?" The hero opened his mouth. When he spoke, his voice was a crack of thunder from the clouds above. "I come to end this conflict. Those of you who wish to surrender, lay down your weapons and join us. Those who wish to die, raise your weapons against us and fall to the storm." A handful of the enemy trembled and without a second thought dropped their weapons, shed their colors, and joined the hero. Those who didn't join the hero made a different choice. They raised their weapons and without a second thought began their assault. "So be it." His voice shook the ground. It slowed their charge, but only for a moment. The hero raised his weapon. "Do not falter. The Tempest is with us. You will be protected." The small band of soldiers picked up their weapons, looking forward. Those who had switched sides stood with them. They didn't look fully confident in their choice, but at times fear is the right motivation, especially for survival. The hero struck the ground with his spear. They were surrounded by a cyclone. Arrows, spears, and javelins hit the wall but did not pierce the wind. "Let them come. Do not fear. Fight as a storm." He channeled the cyclone into a wall and pushed it in each direction. It struck the enemy, throwing them back and protecting the hero's men for precious moments. With his spear pointed forward, the hero closed his eyes and felt the storm raging in his body. It pushed him into action. He opened his eyes and charged the enemy. He was prepared to fight alone. As he reached the first enemy and struck him with the lightning-infused spear tip, he looked behind and saw the soldiers fighting alongside him. He had never seen men fight with such fervor. They were a squall of metal that came to life. It was violent to those that opposed them. To those that accepted them and joined the hero's forces, they were a shield. Thunder, lightning, rain, and cold burst from the hero as he fought. When an enemy would get close, the hero only had to call upon the storm and guide the spear to stop the enemy. His small band of soldiers took on the enemy that was 10 times their size. The power of God is dangerous. Those who realized that their fight was worthless lowered their weapons and joined the hero's band. They tore their old colors and placed upon themselves the charred clothing of those that had fallen in battle. Those who fought with the hero took charred wood and used it to mark themselves. They called themselves Stormbound. Once the number of this defeated squad was no more than a dozen. Now they were as large as a company of soldiers, 150 strong. They followed the hero through the battlefield. They accepted those that would follow and struck down those who would not. It was a continuous fight. When one group of enemies would fall, another would rise. With lightning in his veins, he never had to rest. The hero saved hundreds of his allies and guided his men to safety. After hours of constant battle and marching, they reached the mountain. The base of the mountain had a camp with more soldiers, a safe haven for his men. The storm was still overhead. The hero still felt the power. In the distance, though, he could see clear skies. He had to decide what the right course of action was. Use the power to lead his men into battle and obliterate the enemy, or protect his men and let this storm pass. Many were injured. Many were part of his original band of warriors, but hundreds, if not thousands, had joined his side. Once all of this was finished and the storm no longer lived inside him, would they abandon their new oaths? Would the Stormbound soon be a distant memory, along with all those who had already fallen in this field of death? There was something that needed to be done. A way to put them on the right path and hone their newly found strength. They would follow him. If it was blood and bone he sought, they would be the first to take it. The hero had met the tempest, but these men had become a storm in their own way. Standing atop a ledge, he looked over the battlefield. He could still hear the screams of those in pain, and still the scent of death. These senses were diminished after his recent ascent to power, but he still knew what waited for him. A crack of thunder and a flash of lightning brought him to a new vision. There was no God. He only saw the world, the death and destruction that men brought to each land they took. The message was clear. His quest was not over. There was battle that still waited for him. The vision ended. He stood and jumped into the air. He walked through the camp. He spoke to the soldiers and told them to gather under the cliff. There he would give them the final piece they needed to become a unified force. He raised his voice and the clouds spoke for him. Tear your old colors from your coats and armor. Mark your forehead with a line of coal. As of this moment, you are bound for the storm and its purpose. Stormbound. The soldiers didn't question his request. The tearing of their original colors sounded like a torrent of rain. They finished their baptism. The hero threw the spear to the ground, causing a lightning bolt to hit the area that it struck. With their attention on him, the hero spoke again. Stormbound. There is one final challenge we must face. The enemy still stands. Sharpen your weapons and prepare your minds. We march. He heard the crowd chant, Stormbound! Their words rose and touched the clouds, piercing the heavens. He could feel them go beyond himself and the power he was given. Together his men's voices were the thunder. Their blades were lightning. Their blood was the rain that fed the land. A storm had come, and the hero almost thought that even his own god couldn't stop them now. Even after the storm passed, their power would fuel many battles to come. He left the mountain and entered a mass of soldiers. He raised his spear and began the long march toward death. Our final battle shall soon come to pass. The hero led them into battle. Along their path were enemies who became allies, and those who didn't join them fell to their onslaught. The art of death was drawn with blood. Songs of their ruthlessness were still sung in the clouds. Whenever you hear a storm cloud speak, this was the battle that inspired it. The clash was unlike any had ever seen, a dance made of metal and blood. The men knew who led them in this battle, and so they did not fear. When one of their own would fall, two more would take his place, and the battle would continue in full force. The storm continued, but there was a moment when the rain slowed and the thunder didn't speak. At that moment, a new threat entered the battle. It came in a blast of wind and rain. The moment of calm was the enemy's champion gathering their strength. The adversary carried a sword that gleamed with an energy similar to the Greatspear, a power that the hero recognized. The Chosen met in the middle of the battlefield. They did not clash. They looked at one another and waited. It was only a matter of time until the storms clashed. No words were spoken, but they understood that both were called by the gods to do their bidding. They were given the power to end this fight, and this was the final test. Which god was stronger? Which power would prevail? These are the questions the gods ask. They put their pawns on the board and watched them play their games. Once the gods chosen were done sizing the other up, the adversary surged forward and struck first. The hero parried the blow and hit the ground with the end of his spear. It threw out a burst of wind that knocked the adversary away. He retaliated by swinging his sword with a blast of lightning that struck the hero and knocked him down. The adversary jumped and landed on the hero. The energies collided in a shockwave. Anyone in the vicinity was thrown back. The energy burst and the combatants flew into the air, striking each other. Their battle called forth lightning that destroyed scores of their armies. Their struggle created a whirlwind that turned into a tornado. They were the eye of the storm, forces and powers no mortal had ever seen. The elements bent to their will as their weapons struck. The hero realized this battle would not end the war, but would only destroy the area around them. If one of them did not finish this fight, more would be called and the gods' games would continue. He made a choice that would change the fate of this land, but would save the world. With each strike of his weapon, he gathered energy, knowing that when he held this power, it would end in his own destruction. He looked like he was losing the fight. The hero began to slow his assault, the power he held making it difficult to fight. That didn't matter. He knew his battle would soon be done. His end would also be the end of the war. His body held the final ounce of power. He lunged and grappled the adversary and fell to the earth. As they fell, the hero placed all of his gathered energy and strength into the Stormbound Great Spear. As they landed, the hero thrust his spear into his enemy. A wave of energy shook the land. No one was around to see what happened, but as the forces of each side came upon the crater, they saw that only one body remained. The hero stood, still raising his spear. He looked at his men and smiled. They heard the clouds speak. "The fight is done." It was a soft voice, unlike the thunder that had come before. His body disappeared. What was left was the Stormbound Great Spear suspended by an unseen force. The rain, thunder, lightning, and dark clouds left the battlefield. This marked the end of the conflict. The forces took the remaining weapon as a sign of which side reigned victorious. Legend says that the hero rides the storms and ends conflicts before they grow too dangerous. We don't know if that is true, but for now, the story keeps the world more peaceful.